right now, we're going to have a roll call.
Mayor Ann Peterson,
Here.
Chuck Bennett,
Here.
Laura Tessler, absent. Brad Nanke, absent. Rich Clausen,
Here.
Diana Dickey, Cheryl Thomas,
Here.
Bob Cannon, absent. Dan Clem, absent. Richard Berger,
Here.
Jan Collette,
Here.
J.B. Summers,
Here.
Larry George,
Here.
Terrence McEvely,
Here.
Darlene Strauss, Strozit, sorry. Dan Motley,
Here.
James Vick, absent. Okay.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we'll all now stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, we have the agenda, or excuse me, the approval of the meeting agenda for the last meeting we had, which was on December the, got it here pretty somewhere.
This is approval of this agenda. This one is approval of this agenda.
Oh, approval of this, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, yes, okay. This will be approval of this meeting agenda. Do I hear?
So moved.
So, okay, Chuck, so moved?
Second.
Second, Rich Clausen. Okay, any additions to the meeting tonight? Any?
Yeah, we're fine. No additions.
No additions, okay. All right, then we'll move on into the next order of business, which is the election of officers.
And then you need a vote.
And we need we're going to need a vote on this, on the election of officers, so. That's
A
what,
vote on the meeting agenda. So
Oh, I'm sorry.
It's been moved and seconded.
I'm sorry, we need a vote on the meeting agenda. All in favor of the agenda, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Thank you.
And the motion passes.
The motion passed, yeah. As you see, I'm new at this.
It looks easy until you're up here and I'll tell you it's complicated.
So, anyway, so now we have the election of officers. So, do I hear any motions from the floor for election of officers for the position of chairperson? Chuck?
I nominate Darlene Strozit.
Okay, any other nominations?
Do we need a second on that? I'll second that.
Okay, a second. Any discussion on that or any?
Any other nominations?
Okay. No, if there's no other, yes.
Excuse me, point of order if I can. I understand that we're meeting next week to get some orientation for us new folks, but frankly...
Would you kind of speak into the microphone? I'm having a hard time hearing you.
Frankly, I'm not sure what the chairperson's duties and responsibilities are, like with the
Okay.
vice,
They-
et cetera.
They preside over the meeting just like I am right now. So they preside over the meeting agenda and as the chairperson of the budget committee.
Okay. Does that include the urban renewal budget committee too, then?
Yes,
It's one and the same?
yes.
Thank you.
Any other questions about that? Okay, we have a motion on the floor and seconded that Darlene Strozit for chairperson. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, motion passed. Darlene?
I would be happy to defer to the vice chair for the remainder of the meeting and take over at the end, or the next meeting.
Okay, that's fine, thank you.
I did not arrive tonight, and I was going to nominate you.
And you got ambushed, so I understand, so. Okay, then, all right, now, then the position of vice chairperson is open. Chuck?
I nominate Rich Clausen.
Second.
Okay. It's the motion, Rich Clausen for vice chairperson has been made and seconded. But I think Arlene, did you second it? Yes. Okay, any other nominations? Okay, if none, then we call for the vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Same sign? Okay, the motion passed. Okay, now for the position of secretary.
It does that.
We're getting a lot of
I got
action
a
in that
slate.
corner down there.
I'm just trying to keep you moving here. I nominate Laura Tesler.
She's not here to defend herself.
No,
so-
she's not.
Well, that'll teach her to come to the meeting, won't it?
Yes, it will.
Second.
Okay, all those in favor of Laura Tesler for secretary, please say, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, motion carried, Laura Tesler as secretary. Okay, now we have, move on to the position, or the minutes from the previous meeting, December the 13th meeting.
I move approval of the minutes from December 13th, 2010.
Okay, Darlene Stroza moved in a second.
I'll second that with discussion.
Yes.
Under number 11, the next meeting was scheduled to be January 11th, and that, I don't believe that was held.
I'm sorry, you'll have to speak in the mic, I just can't hear you.
I say under number 11, the next meeting was scheduled to be January 11th, and I don't believe that was held.
No, it wasn't, it was rescheduled to this night, yeah.
Yeah, would that matter for the record?
Does that need to be corrected, Ms. Neville?
No, at the time, we had fully anticipated the 11th.
Okay.
So for the minutes, that would be accurate.
Yeah, thank you for pointing that out, yeah, that was... Any other things? Additions, corrections? Okay, all in favor of accepting the minutes of the December 13th meeting, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Same sign, and say, no. Okay.
Point of
Motion-
order.
Yes?
I'd like to abstain since I wasn't at that meeting. I don't know if I need to declare that for the record.
Okay. So,
I'm going to ask the city attorney, we don't probably have a majority of people who are here at that meeting, so should we wait on approval of the minutes?
Well, you've already taken a vote,
Okay.
so you have to do a motion to reconsider. Do we have how many people are here who are?
I believe
How many were, I'm sorry.
here who were at the previous meeting, probably two.
I show here that those absent was Berger, myself, McAvelli, and Whitney. We're not at that meeting. At the December 13th.
Mr. Chair, could we go ahead and have a show of hands of those who were here at the December 13th meeting?
Looks like five. So it's not a quorum.
So you don't have a quorum this year. So you probably should defer this.
Okay, we can defer that into the next meeting. Yeah.
The other issue is that when a person's going to abstain, they need to make that notice before the vote is taken,
Yeah.
rather than after it's taken.
Right. Okay, correspondence. Do we have any correspondence?
Mr. Chair, I'm Deborah Neville, the Budget Officer, and I'm here to say there is no correspondence this evening.
Okay. Okay, we got handout material then for this meeting tonight. Has everybody had a chance to review that?
Mr. Chair, next on the agenda, we have the five-year forecast.
Oh, I'm sorry, yeah,
Although if
I'm
you'd
sorry,
like to
yeah.
change that.
Thank you. I'm Linda Norris. I'm the Salem City Manager, and I'd like to present the five-year forecast, and we'll have the slides coming up on both screens here in just a second. Thank you. And Doug Gabbard from our finance department is going to help me with these slides as we go forward. I'm very pleased to present the general fund forecast to you tonight. For people at home or people who are new to the budget committee, we do a 5-year forecast every year prior to putting together our budget recommendation. This gives us a forecast of the anticipated revenue over the 5-year times and what we project the expenditures to be and what our beginning fund balance would be each year. So we are on in the city, as I think most of you know, a fiscal year. So our budget starts July 1st of each year and goes through June 30th of the following year. The forecast helps guide our budget strategy and helps us get a multi-year perspective on what's happening with revenue and expenditures. The important thing about that is we not have one year that looks good and spend a lot of money without realizing that it might cause a deficit in a year or two out, and that's why we do a 5-year look. The forecast is a snapshot in time. It changes as circumstances change or as we adopt a budget. Sometimes that causes changes. We use our financial assumptions, and we'll tell you what that is, and then after my presentation we'll give you actually a copy of the 5-year forecast document that has more detail in it, so you can look at that, and then if you have any questions at the next meeting, we'll go through that then. I would like to start, because of this kind of volatile economy, start updating the 5-year forecast every 6 months so that we can see how decisions and spending patterns might change that. So I'd like to start with the trends. The first one are the economic trends, and most of you know that in December we had an economist from the University of Oregon, Dr. Tim Dewey, do a presentation to us on the economy. Last year we looked at some of these trends and either had a plus if it's a positive trend, the straight line with 2 arrows on it if it's kind of staying flat, and then a minus sign if it's a negative trend. And you can see that most of our economic trends can remain either negative or flat. Population growth, we continue to experience small and steady population growth, and that's good in a number of ways. It's much better to be growing than having a population decline. The fact that it's a slow growth really helps us both in providing services and in our stability over time. Property value is declining. It hasn't declined to the extent that we would make that a negative, but if it continues on that path, it would. Personal income, we know in the area, has declined from about an average income of $32,000 in 2009 to $31,837. So it's a small decline, but it is declining. We've lost about 6,300 jobs in the Salem MSA since our peak in 07-08, so that's negative. As you know, unemployment remains high. Building permits, I want to talk about that just a little bit. We've had a significant decrease in building permits over this difficult economic time. We have had in the last year some large projects like Salem Hospital and the State Hospital, and those have helped with building permit revenue, but those are tax-exempt facilities, and so it doesn't help us with property tax revenue. So we're saying that that's a flat trend. And then assessed value to real market value. In Measure 50 that was passed in 1997, split assessed value from real market value for property, rolled back the assessed valuation, froze that, and then it can only increase at 3% a year. We are finding that that gap between assessed value and real market value is closing, but not because assessed value is rising, it's because real market value is decreasing. And so we have that also as a flat trend. Our revenue trends remain pretty flat. Growth in revenue per capita is flat. First year property tax collection, we're finding that it's down just slightly. We collect taxes generally over 3 years, we hope to collect most of the revenue in the first year, and we've been collecting about, in this last year, 93.5% of it in the first year, which is a good trend. In the past, over the past 10 years, it's been, that collection has been as high as 95.4, but that's been staying fairly the same over the last couple of years, and so we think that's positive. Our expenditure trends, employees per capita are declining, and I think as a resident of the community, you might feel like that's good news because we have fewer employees providing the services, so our costs are lower. The bad news about it is a lot of employees are doing a lot more work. We have very heavy workloads, and we're not really able to meet the increased service needs that we have in the community because we have not been able to increase the number of employees to any extent in the last several years. We're paying off our general fund debt, so that's a positive trend. General fund debt declined from $13.3 million in 08-09 to $12.5 million in 9-10. This is from general obligations bond, the fire bond, and the street and bridges bond, and also from our pension obligation bonds. So we're paying that off. Expenditures per capita has stayed about flat because our budget, our general fund budget, has pretty much stayed flat. And we have a negative for the PERS mandate for those increased rates and healthcare costs. We're experiencing the same kind of change in healthcare costs as everyone is, I think, in this economy. Then when we look at net assets, those are positive trends, and that's because we have really worked, as people on the council and the budget committee know, over the last 4 years to try to build up our beginning fund balance to help us carry us through this really difficult time. So those are positive trends. So I want to talk a little bit about our financial environment. We know from the Tim Dewey's economic forecast, and I've heard other national economic forecasters talk about this. Officially, when you're looking from an economic point of view, the recession is over. I think if you talk to small business owners and other people in the community, they don't feel like the recession is over. What that means when people say it is that we're not continuing to see those steep declines. What is happening, though, is that it's not getting better. We kind of hit a bottom, and it's just very slowly getting better. So it's not something that got worse and is going to bounce back up. I don't think it's going to predicted to bounce back up for several years. And you can see some of the factors that lead to that. One of the issues, that we have in Oregon is a state budget gap of $3.5 billion. They have to deal with that. We're not sure what all of those solutions are going to be. We know we have a lot of great people at the legislature who are working on that. But that can impact our economy, which then can impact the city's revenue too as we go forward. So we're continuing to watch that. There are 2 points on the slide I want you to look at. It's a pretty busy slide, but this is one of the ones that Tim Dewey talked to us about. This shows what the predictions have been for non-farm employment in the state. The very top line, the blue one with the cross mark, shows before this recession hit what it was anticipated in terms of employment growth. Every one of those lines is, a quarterly financial report from the state after that, and you can see that that line just continues to get lower and lower. The bottom red line, the thick line at the bottom, is from December 2010. It's the lowest one yet, and shows that we're not anticipated to get to the level of employment that we had in 2008 until about 2015. If we find over the next year or year and a half that we have a significant number of layoffs from the state or counties or other cities, that line may continue to drop over time. So we're definitely not going to have a vast recovery. The news gets better as I go, I want you to know. Starting out with the negative. Salem area payrolls, you can see again that if we had stayed on that line that we had been on for several years, the red line at the top, what payrolls would have been, but you can see the gap is about 37,000 jobs from what would have originally been anticipated to what the situation is right now. Our financial position in the city's general fund is relatively stable, and I'm going to say relatively. We don't have a rosy picture here, but we have one that we're just managing as we go through. Our revenue growth is slow compared to other, but stable compared to other U.S. cities. Many of you have probably heard in the media or in things you've read about cities that have shut down half their fire departments or laid off hundreds of police officers, or some cities in Colorado turned off every third street light to save the money on electricity. So there are a number of pretty drastic measures that have been taken by cities to try to manage within their budget. I don't anticipate we're going to get to that level, and we're definitely going to try to make sure we don't, so that we continue to manage things very carefully. But compared to that, we're in a pretty stable position. We've increased intentionally our fund balance over the last 3 years, and another good thing is inflation is still low, and that's helping us quite a bit as we go through this. So when we look at our 5-year forecast, one of the problems that you'll see right away on this is our resources are growing slower than our costs. And that's been true for a couple of years now, and it's something that we continue to deal with. We have been able to, we always have about $2.5 million budgeted for our general fund contingencies. So that's money that's been appropriated and can be spent for things that come up that are emergencies or unanticipated opportunities. For example, maybe we need some money for matching for a grant, things like that this money is available for. The City Council has been very careful about not spending much of this money over the last few years, and we've been able to carry over about $2.3 million or a little more than that every year. And so that's helped with our level of savings. Then the other thing, and I'll show you a chart in just a minute, is in terms of our general savings within the general fund, we've been able to save between about 6 and 8% of our general fund budget every year by constantly looking at other things we can do. We'll go to the next chart to show you this. The total column here, bar, is our general fund expenditures every year from 1998-99 to 2009-10. The small purple bar you see at the top is our general fund contingency. You can see in those mid-years it was quite a bit more in general fund contingency than we've had before or since. And that was because the city was in a lawsuit with Quest during those years. We set aside the money, we won the lawsuit, and so didn't have to pay that money out. And instead that money was available for things like $1 million of it was used for the sidewalk improvement program. Some money was used for some of the upgrades to the airport, other needs that we had in city operations. Then the light blue bar at the top is the savings that we've had every year, and I'll tell you where those savings come from. A lot of times we'll have position vacancies, someone leaves, and especially in these days we try to keep those positions open if we can for a few months to achieve those savings. Sometimes we do, usually we do an analysis, except maybe in police officers and firefighters, of do we really need this position? Is there another way to fill it? Is there another way to get the work done? So some of the savings come from that. We're constantly finding efficiencies, and when the departments present their budgets to you this budget year, they'll talk about ways that we've saved money and ways that they found to do the work for less money. Sometimes we'll have a project planned and realize we don't need to do it, so projects might be delayed or canceled. And we've had I guess depending on how you feel about federal stimulus money, but we've had the good fortune to receive quite a bit of federal stimulus money over the last year to buy police equipment, firefighter equipment, and to do some energy conservation measures and to deal with some of the deferred maintenance items that we would have had to pay for out of our budget if we had not had that. So all of those and grants and appropriation requests help us build up those savings. So this is the forecast showing a 6% savings scenario. You can see that we start the year at the line on the top with our beginning balance. And we anticipate we'll be in 11-12 at about 17.2 million. But as you look across that line, you'll see that that's down to 1 million in the 5th year. So it doesn't take long to use that kind of one-time money. And I'll talk more about why that's the case. The next line is revenues, what we anticipate receiving every year in new revenue. New in the sense that for that current year. So that's our total resources. Our requirements are all of our expenditures that we have for all of our general fund operations. And you can see that starting in 13-14, in this forecast, we're spending more than our total resources, and that's when we start to significantly draw down on the beginning fund balance. City Council policy is that we have a beginning fund balance of about 10% of our general fund budget, which is about $10 million. And so by 13-14, we're down to about 6.8 million, so that's a little low, but we may be able to achieve savings a little higher than that. But then on the 4th and 5th year of the forecast, we have an insufficient beginning fund balance going into those next years. So that's our challenge. It's very hard, as those of you who've been on this committee for some time or have done budgets for a long time, to really predict what's going to happen 4 and 5 years out. You know, there are some things that have happened that we would not have predicted. So I'm feeling pretty comfortable if we can solve for the 3rd year out, that we'll probably be good as we monitor this every year during the year, and every year the following year as we put our budget together, that we'll be in a fairly stable position. This budget, and you'll see that some of the big increases in costs, that PERS increase, which was a double rate collar, which means that we're correcting for the money that was lost in the stock market during the bad economy, and then what the requirements are for it to be a funded program. Those increases are happening in 11-12, 2 years later in 13-14, and then also in 15-16. So those are big jumps. What may happen, there's a lot of talk, I think, at the legislature and around the state about some kind of PERS reform. So that may change somewhat too as we go farther into this forecast period. We also looked at what the scenario would be if we were only able to achieve 3% savings if something unanticipated happened, or we should lose a lot of money to state share, lose our state shared revenue as the state solves their problem. And you can see that's much more concerning. We have a problem starting in 12-13 at the end of that year, and then it gets more serious as we go forward. When you look at the ending fund balance, would be 10.7 million deficit at that point. Oregon budget law does not allow us to do that, and we would not do it professionally either. And so that would mean that we would be making significant cuts over time if that's the savings that we were really anticipating having. These are some guiding principles for our financial management, and we've had these principles for a few years, that we want to keep our operating costs within revenue. When we look at what we actually spend at the end of the year, we want to make sure we're not spending more than we're receiving in revenue. And I'll just let you look at the other ones rather than reading them to you. The issue with disadvantaged residents, we spend about a little over $400,000 every year for social service programs to help support some of those that help people in the community who have the biggest needs. We also do things like there are few recreation programs we still have. A lot of them are for disadvantaged children. We have free movies in the park and splash pads and other things like that, so families with children have things to do that are low cost or no cost. And then we continue to work on our partnerships as we go. So in putting together the city manager's recommended budget, we have, I think, conservative but realistic revenue projections. From Tim Dewey's presentation, we believe that we can increase property tax revenue, what we anticipate in the 4th and 5th years, and that's in this projection. I'm going to recommend that we not add new programs, because I think we can manage our way through this issue if we keep the current service system, or maybe a reduced service system. But if we start adding new positions or new programs, we will not be able to manage without significant cuts in other places. I'm also going to recommend to the Budget Committee that we start, as many of you know, we just have not had money to really budget appropriately for deferred maintenance, and I know that's a big concern of our mayor. And I'm going to recommend that we put about $500,000 additional money in for deferred maintenance in the general fund budget, so that we can start dealing with some of our roofing needs, and sometimes we have software needs or other things that help us just maintain our systems as we go. Some other strategies, these are similar to ones that we've had before. I'm going to talk just a minute about the wage adjustments. We have 4 unions who we negotiate with in the city, and we budgeted a 1% increase each year in the financial forecast. We don't know what those amounts will really be because we haven't negotiated those contracts. But we think, and council has really followed this, that it's better to do very small incremental increases as we go, rather than letting wages get far behind market and then having to do a large increase in one year as has happened before. The financial risks that we're continuing to face, obviously the state budget solution, we have a little over $4 million in state shared revenue, and we won't know probably what the suggestion will be about that. If inflation goes up, if we had emergencies and had to eat into our contingencies, if the school districts, the counties, the state, other agencies have significant layoffs, that's going to impact our economy, as I've mentioned before. That can have impacts on us. And then again, we don't know what the labor union contracts will be. So the next steps are that we're putting together our budgets. I'll recommend the city manager's recommended budget to you and present that on April 6th. Then we'll have presentations each Wednesday through April and the first 2 weeks in May, where departments will come and present their budgets. You can ask questions about that. And I want you to know that for all budget committee members, but especially the new ones may want to do this, one of the things we'll talk about doing is having a preview for you either the Tuesday night before the Wednesday meeting or at noon on Wednesday before the meeting. So if you just want to become more familiar or have more questions, you're welcome to come, and the departments representing that night will be there to answer your questions. So we appreciate your work on the budget committee, really welcome the new budget committee members, and think this will be an interesting time. Unfortunately, I don't think it's going to be we won't be looking at as many cuts over the next year as has been the case for the last 4 years. And so it'll really be a question of your priorities and how you want us to proceed given this forecast. So that's my presentation, and if there are any questions, I'm happy to take those.
Linda, can we go back to the slide that had the savings and
Yes.
the decline in the beginning fund balance?
Yes.
So I got to be missing something because I don't get the math to come out after I look at the savings assumptions. So could you bring the math down, just say, take fiscal year 12-13 and explain the math all the way down the column?
Okay, sure. We would start the year 12-13 with 15.3 in our beginning working capital. And I just want to talk about the beginning working capital is part of what we use. We don't receive most of the general fund revenue until late November when we start collecting property tax. So we still have operations that go from July 1st until November, and that's the money we use during that time. If we need more, we borrow it from other funds and then pay it back when we receive property tax revenue. So we'd start the year with that. We will project $96 million in revenue in property tax, franchise fees, state shared revenue, rents, all of our revenue sources that year. So our total resources will be $111.3 million. Then when we look forward at what we anticipate our operating costs to be in the general fund for police, fire, planning, recreation, parks, all of those general fund services, we expect that to be $107.6 million. Then we anticipate that that's what we would be budgeting, but we think from that we would be able to save about 6% from, I talked about, from position savings and other, overtime savings, that sort of thing. And so what would be left at the end of that year is $12.1 million. And then that carries, so that's the difference between 107.6 and 111.3, and then adding back the $8.5 million. And that $12.1 million then starts the new fiscal year.
So the savings assumption in that chart is 6%.
Yes.
And is that assumption made primarily through, like, employee attrition, through not eliminating programs? I'm wondering, is it general efficiencies, you find ways to do things better? I'm not sure where that saving assumptions number
Yes,
comes from.
and I could talk about that more. A lot of it, or I don't know, a big portion of it will come from position vacancies that we have open, that maybe we'll decide to wait for 3 months to fill a position, or sometimes do some analysis and decide just to leave that position vacant, not fill it, and then we cut it out of the budget in the next year. It can come from overtime savings. Last year, the police department saved a significant amount of money because they started using a different system for how they schedule police officers for court, and so that saved a lot of overtime. We also budget for what we anticipate will happen each year. And in police, for example, we didn't have those cases where they found, 10,000 pieces of stolen equipment, and it took months of overtime to deal with that. If we don't have, unfortunately that we had any, but the number of homicides have been very low in the last 2 years. So if we don't have those kind of major cases that require a lot of overtime, we would have savings from that. We budget, for example, in fire, of the activity that we anticipate. If we don't have that kind of activity that would take a lot of overtime, there would be overtime savings in fire, or they might find a different use for equipment, or during the year we might find that our radio rates can go down in some of our departments, or we just went to a new health insurance program to save money, so those costs this year for the last 6 months will be lower than we had budgeted this year. And then it's also from efficiencies. Employees in this city, our culture is really, if we can find a less expensive way to do something, that we do it. Or if we can find a way to partner with another agency to do something, we do that. So I frequently will get messages from departments if we just found a way to do this one thing that's going to save us $40,000 this year, or save us $200,000 this year. So all of that goes together to result in these kind of savings. Or we might have money budgeted for an equipment purchase and then get a grant that would allow us to buy that equipment. So then that ends up being a savings that's carried to the next year.
Now, with the budget assumption that wages are going to rise 1% a year, you just finished the negotiation with either fire or police, I'm drawing a blank, that obviously exceeded the 1% per year. So what's the next union group to come up for negotiation?
The other unions we'll be negotiating with this year, and we've started, would be our police union, Salem Police Employees Union, our 911 Communication Workers Union, and our AFSCME union. And what we look at when we negotiate is in similar size cities for similar work, what are the wages in that area, and then what are the other things in the contract. And we try to keep employees at about the average of the market. So if we were looking at 6 comparable agencies, probably 3 of them are going to pay a little more and 3 of them less than we're paying. We try to stay at the average. We are with those contracts. I think we're pretty close to market right now, so we'll see how that goes as we negotiate.
When do those new contracts for those groups take effect?
When
would they take effect?
July 1st.
July 1st.
Yes. Those contracts all end on June 30th of this year. When we negotiate contracts, sometimes the length of them is between 1 and sometimes 4 years. In this economy, we probably won't do a 4-year contract, or that wouldn't be our recommendation from the city, because things are just hard to predict over that period of time.
So a lot of the savings the last few years have been over attrition and positions that you haven't filled.
And overtime savings and grants and a number of things.
But if you had to estimate today how many unfilled positions are spread out throughout the city departments?
There are probably, I think the human resource director's here, I'm going to say about 28 positions right now.
Right. But again, I think we talked about this early last year, the number of actual layoffs from the city were a number somehow, my memory tells me around 10, 9, or...
Well, in the general fund, over the last 3 years, I think we've laid off about 30-some positions. I'm sorry, I don't have that number right at the top of my head. Building and Safety Fund has laid off a number of positions because just the development activity has really decreased. Water and Sewer has had some layoffs over that period of time too. So it's different by funds. I think the total is closer to about 70 positions either laid off or cut citywide over that period.
Right, but in the general fund, it's probably...
I'm sorry, Ms. Pennell, do you have the exact number? We can get that for you, Member McKelvey, for the next meeting.
So you have approximately 28 unfilled positions that at some point, if the economy turns around or whatever, will probably be filled again in the future. How many positions did you lose people in that you've eliminated the position?
Well, we have, of the positions that were laid off, or sometimes the position was vacant and we just didn't fill it, all of those have been eliminated. You may recall that about 3 years ago, we did a pretty massive reorganization in the city. We eliminated the entire community services department structure. Some of those programs, like parks, moved to Public Works, and library changed from a department to a division, and that moved to the city. That department head position was eliminated. The library is no longer a department, it's a division. That position was eliminated. So all of those have been eliminated.
And which year is the big PERS explosion coming in? Is that 13, 14?
Starting July 1st of this year, and then every 2 years, we're anticipating there'll be another change unless they really are able to recover from the losses that occurred when the market was bad. It's when anyone has a retirement fund, it's important that it be adequately funded. And this one is not adequately funded at the current time, and so that's what's taking the infusion of additional money into the PERS system.
So do your projections include a relatively negative worst-case scenario then on the PERS explosion, or is that a relatively...
Yes, it's going to be a big cost increase over this time period.
And so that, what you anticipate that large cost increase to be is in the forecast?
It is in the forecast.
So
if it's not that bad, we'll be better off.
Right, you're more likely to be surprised on the downside now than on the upside.
I think this is probably as bad as it's going to be.
I mean, that's what I mean. If you're going to get a surprise, you're going to get a surprise that, whoa, it didn't cost us as much as we thought.
That's right.
Where it's unlikely, because you've probably almost taken a worst-case scenario, that it's probably unlikely that the PERS explosion would cost more than you forecast.
That's right.
Yeah. Member Summers?
Are the 28 positions that you're talking about dedicated to the general fund, or are they general fund in other areas also?
I believe the list I saw was for all positions in the city. Is that correct? Yes. My advisors behind you are nodding yes.
Because actual spending this year will be what? 350 million, not 104 million, when you take all of the budget together.
All of the budget together is about $441 million for this year, but that includes a lot, big construction budget and public works. But we anticipate, so most of the savings in general fund, about 70% of the costs in general fund are for employees and, their resulting expenses. So most of the savings, because our materials and supplies budget have gotten pretty small, are from either overtime savings, personnel savings, that sort of thing. And then the rest of it would be from materials and services where we've saved money.
Some of the building and permitting are outside the general fund.
That's right.
And that's where you made a big reduction in personnel last year.
Probably over the last 2 years, yeah.
Oh, okay, hold on. Okay.
So, is it fair to say, unless there's something that I haven't been privy to, that during the current contract cycle of the contracts that are up this year, is that you didn't really get any concessions during the current contract from the unions that you're currently negotiating with?
We have not done midterm bargaining with any of our unions, and so we've been waiting for the contracts to come up, which now the other three are, and as we negotiate that, we'll look at those issues. The non-represented employees, we have about a little over 200 non-represented employees that are managers, supervisors, or confidential employees in the general fund, have increased their health insurance deductibles, and the fire union also increased their health insurance deductibles, and we'll be asking that of each union as we go. And then we'll look for other opportunities for savings as well. But all of that needs to be negotiated. We negotiate in good faith, but I would say that our unions have been really responsible over this time in terms of the initial requests we've been receiving.
Right, but the 1% wage number that's baked into the forecast, we're talking just wages and salaries there. We're not talking fringe or anything else, right?
It's the wages and salaries plus the benefits that are tied to wages and salaries. So the forecast assumes, if your wage goes up 1%, you have a small increase in your PERS costs as well. Life insurance costs goes up a little bit. I'm trying to think, Connie, could you come to the microphone, or Deborah, and talk about what the other ones are?
The FICA, Medicare would go up in conjunction with that. Any rate-based benefit would go up with every single % increase in salary. So we've included that. That's all part of the numbers in the forecast. In addition to that, we've made forecasts for increases to the health insurance costs, the vision insurance and dental insurances. And when we passed out this booklet, there's actually a page in here. It has a table in it that details all of the increases that we assume to arrive at these numbers for personal services. And they're all in there.
Well, it appeared from the outside that the fire negotiation went smooth. I mean, it
It took
appeared
us
to
over a
be-
year.
Right, but it seemed like everybody was relatively satisfied.
I think so.
As they could
That's
be.
right.
And do you anticipate the other three contracts up for renewal going relatively as smoothly?
Well, we have a few members of those unions in the audience, and I would say I anticipate it going smoothly. So you can talk to them after the meeting. I anticipate.
Okay.
I will tell you through iPad technology, I can tell you that we actually have 31 and a half positions open right now in the general fund. Many of those are police officers, though, that we're in the process of filling. And we want to keep those filled to the extent that we can, so that we don't have to pay overtime. And we have let me see, for example, Public Works, I think we have about 14 and a half positions open, and then a few positions here and there in other departments, other funds.
So would you say at this point that they're removing fire and police from the discussion, okay? Are there areas in the city where the staff is overburdened in other areas because we haven't been
Yes.
able to fill?
Yes.
And those departments might be?
Well, I will tell you that one of the things that I'm going to recommend in our budget, and what I've talked to our department heads about, is we have the resources we're going to have. And so what we need to do is, where we can do things differently and eliminate a position in one area, those are the resources we ought to use for other areas. We're bringing on 3 parks next year, and starting the initial work on Battle Creek, and another one, Lone Oak Park, or Brian Johnston Park, now is going to be coming online quickly. And so there are going to be increased need for seasonal labor for those parks, so we have more people working during the growing season there. Municipal court is another area that continues to be understaffed. We have a very good police department, and we really are aggressive about making sure that those quality of life crimes are prosecuted and that people pay their fines. And so that's an area where we probably need to add a position. So as an example, I have a position in my department, the city manager's office, that we've kept open for several months. And I would anticipate not filling that, but using the resources from that position to help with court and parks. So that's the kind of thing that we'll be looking at in this budget.
Okay, I have Member Motley, then Member Bennett.
Yes, because this chart isn't labeled, let me clarify. This is general fund, this is all funds,
This is general fund.
okay? What's the city's basis of accounting?
I'm
Cash?
sorry, our
Cash
basic-
accrual, modified accrual?
Tony, would you come, or Doug? Yeah.
The figures, Doug Gabbard, Administrative Services Department, the figures that you see are budgetary in nature, which means they will be cash basis. But if you look at our financial disclosures each year, some of those that are not budgetary basis will be modified accrual. So we
Okay.
really show it both ways in our financial disclosures.
So
But this is
then,
cash.
Beginning balance is cash on hand,
Yes.
as is ending
Yes.
balance,
Yes.
Yes.
and does not include anticipated or deferred revenue,
Yep.
okay?
Now, do you mean that in an accounting sense?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Okay. And how many funds does the city of Salem have?
We have different, I think it's, I don't
We have,
remember the exact.
we have 21 other funds in the city of Salem, and then in the Urban Renewal Agency, there are 4 funds. So we have 22, counting the general fund, that are in the city.
Okay. Not to consume time now, but could we get a list of those funds and
Yes.
what their general accounting classification is in terms of whether they're trust and agency, special revenue, debt service, et cetera?
Yes, and you can look that up online if you would like, or we can give you a budget book for this year that has all of that information. But the city's budget is online on our city's website under budget. Or you can go to the A to Z search function and get all of that information.
Okay. Is the city of Salem bound by Oregon State budget law?
Yes.
Okay. Can we go back to that slide that I commented with you on?
Absolutely.
Earlier? The plus and minus. I guess I was confused about that. I understood that these were not feelings of good or bad, these ratings, but that these were impact as a result of the title. As an example, employees per capita. If the expenditure trend is to expend more per employee, more on employees per capita, unless I'm an employee, why is that a positive?
Okay, this is the number of employees per capita, and it's just a way to kind of measure over time change. And so from the sense of the public, I think it's positive that we're doing the same or more work with fewer employees in the general fund, and so it's a positive in that regard.
Okay, so again, our employees per capita are going up? The count is going up?
No, it's going down.
The feeling is going up.
The number is going down, and so it's a positive trend for the public because we're doing more work with fewer people.
Okay, so then the public is going to feel bad regarding the general fund debt service. Last year, they felt bad about it,
Well, it's,
and this year, they're going to feel good about it.
I'm not sure how they'll feel, but I'll tell you.
Well, Linda,
that-
what I'm
yeah.
going to is, either this is a numerical symbolization, or it's an esoteric feeling symbolization. And I'm just trying to nail down, is it a feeling, or is it a number? Is it a fact, or is it a
Yes, it's an
fiction?
economic trend, and Mr. Gabbard, maybe you can talk about that in more detail.
Well, there are certainly numbers behind this, and we can certainly make those numbers available. These symbols are meant to answer the question, how's it going? In the sense that is the environmental pressures we're experiencing, or our management of those pressures, is it going well or is it not going well? So to take the employees per capita as an example, from one perspective, having fewer employees per unit of population, having that number go down, can be a sign of efficiency depending on how you look at it. And so in that sense, it would be a positive trend.
Okay, and if we looked at it from another perspective,
It would be different.
okay. So it could be a negative. You could
Sure,
say we need more employees.
Yes, absolutely. If the perspective is that we need employees to provide services, and we are not able to afford those employees and therefore those services, that would be a way of saying maybe it's not going so well.
Okay, okay.
And we use the methodology that's commonly used when other cities look at these kind of benchmarks. So you're right, Member Motley, that, some of them, it depends on what your perspective is, but from an economic trend, given how these economic trends are generally perceived, is what we presented here.
Okay, it just confused me because I guess as an accountant and as an auditor and as a budgetary person, I'm used to dealing with real numbers that are fact and not feelings,
And we can get you the numbers behind this. We were trying just to give a snapshot, is it going in a positive trend or a negative trend as we presented the forecast, but we can certainly give you the numbers so you can make your own assessment about that.
Yeah, that would be good. Perspective rarely changes numbers.
Okay.
And then I'm curious, I was unaware that Salem Hospital is tax exempt. Why is that?
Mr. Mounts, would you like to respond?
It's actually the state hospital. It's the state
yes, I'm
hospital.
sorry.
Not Salem Hospital?
No.
Thank you.
Okay. Is that clear? Okay, Member Bennett?
Thank you. I just want to second Mr. Motley's confusion too. As I looked at those, it really did depend on perspective, and
Okay.
I thought that I just on a couple of them found the same kind of questions he had. So I just want to understand then, on any given day, we're running between 20 and 30 unfilled positions.
No, that's what it is currently.
Okay.
So if, when we fill all of these police officer positions that we're in the process of now, that can drop by half or more.
What would I guess one of the things that would be helpful is in a normal year, if there is one, kind of what the float looks like in terms of empty position. I just think that's kind of interesting because they do represent kind of a constant, I would assume, flowing through the year.
Right.
But they are still positions that we're funding, and it's an interesting idea. Yeah, they do it, I know, at the state level and other government agencies, and it's just sort of what's the size of our personnel empty position float.
Sure.
I think would be helpful.
We can provide that.
One thing I think during the budget hearings or at some point along the way, some specific examples of those efficiencies you described, I think those are really interesting, and I think that for some period, say 6 months or a year, what are the kind of efficiencies that come to your office that result in, what's their nature? How do people, what are they talking about? And then I wondered what the projection is for PERS as a percentage of payroll rolling out over the next few years. I've seen some projections in other agencies going as high as 25% of payroll going into PERS. And I know you bonded your part of your UAL, and I just wondered how that has affected and what the health of your side account looks like.
Okay, we can definitely bring that information to you.
Because that was, I thought, a really good decision when you made it, for the council at that time to have made it, and sort of what was the impact on our obligation, and how does it look I don't know if you can do it in comparison, but it actually, I thought, put the city in a stronger position relative to its PERS obligation.
It did, and until this time, the last time we looked at it, I think was about maybe 6 months ago now, but it was still a positive for the fund and for the city at that point. So we can bring that information back to the next budget committee.
Yeah, I think because we're going to see a lot of news about PERS, and I think understanding the city's relationship with it through its bonding decision is helpful, just to see how we fit into the general news.
Yes.
Which I assume will be, probably reasonably negative as it's discussed, and at least get us in perspective. The other one that comes up, and maybe it's just how old I am, but the use of TANs to deal with your anticipated revenue. currently it's based on cash on hand. We try to keep enough cash on hand to go through to November, to collections. Is there a policy not to use anticipation notes, or is it just a bad way to go? Because I think it'll come up in this discussion.
Yeah. It's not a policy not to use it, but when we have the cash that we can use to avoid the borrowing costs is a less expensive way to do it. We have, if we have to, in some years we might, we've used that money by maybe October, and so for 6 weeks or 8 weeks, we might borrow from some other funds to make up that difference, and then we pay a rate of interest from that borrowing, but it's generally lower. I don't know if Tony Mounts or Doug would like to, from the finance perspective, address that to a more in-depth level.
And to add to that, I guess, is in talking about using accrual as as the methodology, whether, as you showed us in that one slide, we'll be $1 million short in one of the out year, beginning in that out year.
Yeah.
And does that actually represent, would that be handled by using TANs, sort of getting those additional months and rolling it through over time until the economy changes?
Yeah, if we were in this situation that we were going to have a negative $1 million beginning fund balance, that's something that we could not do under state budget law. And so, and you don't borrow money for that. What you do is you cut your operating expenses.
Okay.
And so we would know far before that happened if we were going to be in that situation, and we would start making cuts at that time so that we maintain a stable financial system. We need to do that for our bond rating and our credit worthiness and a number, for the just health of the economy as well. And so we would always take steps ahead of time to make sure we were not in that position.
Okay.
Okay. Member Clausen?
So my question goes back to the presentation by Tim Dewey. I thought that was a great presentation, but I'm curious how much of an impact the economic trend had that he forecast on what we did here. I was, from the chart, we were looking at about a 2.5% increase in revenue a year, it looks like, is what's projected. I felt like, maybe I'm pessimistic, but I felt like he was a little optimistic. I see a lot, actually back a couple. Yeah, there we go. I see a whole lot of downward trend, and I don't see a whole lot down at the bottom quite yet. Mm-hmm. So, if you're thinking downward trend, it's going to bottom out and come back up. Does that affect, if we just kind of level out, say, does that affect that 2.5%, or does that stay pretty steady going up because of the property tax catching back up to actual value?
We, based on his, the work that he did for us, actually increased what we think our property tax collections will be in the 4th and 5th year. And that was really his forecast, as well as that we would do that. So we did use the information we received from him, as well as a lot of historical information and what we know what's going on right now with our budget and the economy, to put these assumptions in this forecast. The forecast document that you have details what each of those assumptions are. And so as we put our budget together, if you feel like, you're being a little too positive there and we need to be more conservative as we put next year's budget together, that would be a time to have those discussions.
Okay, thank you.
I'm sorry. Go ahead. I have a question, but go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead, Larry.
Well, mine is back to the revenue side of it. One of the projections of revenue is state revenue sharing.
Yes.
Given that the gloomy picture over at the Capitol, how comfortable are you with your projection as far as the revenue sharing part of it, getting what you'd like to get?
Yeah, I tend to be a pretty optimistic person, so I'm about 50% comfortable that we will keep it. They have just a horrendous issue that they're dealing with, as everyone knows, and I think they understand what the impact would be on local governments if all of that were just to go away, and I'm hoping that they'll try to mitigate that.
Yeah, that concerns me, because I think it was like $3.5 billion. Isn't that what they're something like that.
3.5 billion,
Yeah,
yes,
they're
for
down.
the
So that,
state.
because we have depended on that in so many years, that, you know, you hear all this all across the country, you know, where they've cut, you know, things to the counties, the cities, and I just didn't know if you'd had any inside information that.
I don't think there is any inside information yet, as they're just struggling with this, but I felt positive enough about it that we've assumed that revenue still will be there. If it's not, if we find out that that's not the case, or it's decreasing, then we'll make some budget adjustments, either probably during our budget cycle with this budget committee.
Yeah, I was going to say, when does that usually come?
I'm anticipating that we'll know that in the next probably 3 months. I don't know that for sure, but that's my anticipation.
All right. Yes. Member McLeod?
So, this being my third year, I think the general sense the last 2 years was the Budget Committee sidestepped a lot of difficult questions. We deferred, last year we deferred into this year. If you look at your 5-year forecast, in your professional opinion, when does this committee need to quit deferring and get proactive so that you don't end up in years 3, 4, and 5 where your forecast shows? Because I think we punted a lot to the future last year. I think that's why the budget failed on the first vote last year, which had never happened before. And everybody just had a feeling that we're just kind of shoving this off into the future. Do you think, I mean, is this the year that we have to quit shoving things off into the future?
Yeah, I think that going into next year, if we have the savings we anticipate having, I think that we'll be fine with our current system for 1 more year. But I think what would be really helpful for the Budget Committee to provide is, if we're not able to save that much, or if we should lose state shared revenue, what would you want us to be looking at, and what would you recommend to the City Council to consider in terms of programs and services in that second year and in that third year? Having those discussions ahead of where we might have to make the decisions, I think, would be a positive thing to do.
Member Summers?
Now, correct me if I'm wrong here, because I think I heard something a while ago that I want to explore. You said that there are some unfilled positions in the police department.
Yes.
Okay, last year we specifically made sure that the police department was fully funded.
Yes.
Because they needed all those dollars in order to protect the citizens.
That's right.
Why then did not the police department, why are they not filling these unfunded positions with overtime to properly protect us?
Well, they are filling the positions. It takes a while, and we have a very good police department, and we have to make sure we get the right people. So sometimes we have some vacancies in that regard. And then they really, and the police chief is here, and maybe Chief Moore, you'd like to come to the podium and talk about how you manage that with overtime and within your budget.
I think you remember that I was quite concerned at the time about this and made an issue of it.
Yes.
Because I felt that the police chief should have given the opportunity to offer up a savings. Well, he did offer up an accidental savings. We didn't expect it. But
Yeah,
you
and
see
we don't anticipate the savings we would have from the police department to, there might be some savings that come from just the normal cycle of how long it takes to fill a police officer position, but we do have the overtime costs. But the savings would be more likely is sometimes they find ways to reduce overtime costs, and so that's more likely what the savings would be. But Chief Moore, would you like to talk about that?
Sure. Jerry Moore, Chief of Police. I will tell you that the beginning of our numerous openings began during the last budget cycle because we anticipated the loss of 3 positions, and when those did not occur, we actually fell behind because we knew we weren't going to fill positions. Since then, we've experienced retirements, some of which we didn't anticipate, and during that time we've also hired officers and brought them on, and some of them did not make it through probationary periods, so we actually fall almost 2 years behind when we do that. As far as your overtime question, we do utilize overtime to maintain our patrol staffing, but we try to mitigate or reduce our overtime in other areas wherever we can so that it doesn't create a burden on our budget.
Yep. Chief, my issue is not with you at all. It was with the budgeting process. in the budgeting process, after you stood up and said, I can meet this commitment, I can meet it, I can protect the community, and I can save money, we came back and told you to spend that money, I believe.
You did not cut the 3 positions. You might want to speak into the microphone too, but we did not cut the 3 positions and added an additional police officer position.
Do I need to repeat anything?
I think we probably got it.
Okay. So it's the issue is how we deal with departments as a budget committee. And basically, I'm very strongly this year going to continue to say what I said last year. If a manager comes forward and says, I can serve you, I can meet my commitments, I can protect the community, and I can save $800,000, I think we ought to say, save $800,000. And we didn't do that last year. Thank you, Chief.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay, yes.
Thanks. I just have an observation and a request. City Manager Norris mentioned earlier my concern about deferred maintenance and the list of things that the city has on a list, which came as a bit of a surprise to me, frankly, when I actually saw the printed list. And excuse me, I would hope that as we're able to realize any savings or any carryovers, that we would look very carefully at how we could reinvest those savings into our city in terms of repairing some of the things that really need to be repaired. I'd like to have the budget committee members all receive a list of that, a copy of that list of deferred maintenance.
We can do that.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we got some handout material, I believe.
I want to thank everyone on the committee for your great questions. I really appreciate it.
Okay, we have...
I don't know, Ms. Neville, did you have something else you wanted to?
Well, I just wanted to say that the documents we handed out are the numbers, a lot more of the numbers behind the presentation that City Manager Norris made. And if you have any questions that come up, of course, feel free to contact us and we'll help walk you through it. But I think some of those questions you had earlier will be answered by reading through this material.
Okay, thank you. Okay, this time we have public testimony for future budget issues. Is there anybody here present that has any testimony on the future budget issues? Yes, sir. You'll come to the podium and state your name and address and... Yes, could you state your name and address, please?
Good evening, I'm Kathleen Duwana. I live at 1045 5th Street, Northeast in Salem. I'm a realtor with the Prudential Real Estate Professionals. I guess under this general category, I'm going to raise an issue that I've raised before in the past. It's not directly related to your general fund, it's related to your sewer and water rates. The fee structure for our residential sewer rates is unfair. It unfairly burdens duplex, triplex, fourplex, multi-unit family owners, multi-family unit owners. The city's own cost of service model study stated multifamily fixed charge is assessed on a per-account basis as opposed to a per-unit basis. That's the policy, but in fact, they've created a series of imaginary accounts to double, triple, quadruple sewer rates charged to duplex, triplex, and fourplex owners. I plan to continue to work to get the city to correct this. That should have a negative impact on your sewer revenues as you release the burden on those who are unfairly being charged. I've done some recent research and I've found, contrary to information shared by staff, that the City of Portland, the City of Eugene, the City of Bend do not create special classes for sewer rates within the residential class of sewer rate. Yet the City of Salem does to pad its revenue. The impact to me personally on one of my units is about $1,000 a year. This is an issue I've raised for a long time, and I hope that perhaps even during this process, we can correct that wrong. If I may talk to your general fund forecast here, I would caution the revenue forecast. I'm in residential real estate sales. I experience now that sales are being forced, or values, property values are being forced downward because of very high tax rates, okay? For an example, a property that is now priced at $200,000 on the market, it's not going to be sold because it has a $5,000 a year tax burden on it. The properties that I'm selling this year, I'm going to say, are selling at rates that are 20 to 30% below maximum assessed values. This is not, and so I think your revenue trend and your revenue forecast may be very, unfortunately, high.
Thank you for your comments. Thank you for coming.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, Chuck? Yes.
Yeah,
I'm sorry. Do you want to stay there just a moment?
Well, it wasn't really to question Kathy. I just want to kind of underscore her question, that this has been an issue that Kathy's raised with us a number of times, and I think made a really good case that there's something going on here that is either unfair or we don't understand. I don't understand clearly how this works, and I really would like to see this explained and it perhaps get talked about at the Budget Committee, because it came up, as you know, in our rate discussion, and I found it of concern then, and I'd sure like to have it really explained and for us maybe to take a close look at it.
We'll do that.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Yes.
I get no questions, but I certainly want to commend Ms. Duana for her patience while we went through the rest of the agenda to get down for her time. Thank you.
Thank you for bringing it to us.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I have a quick question of procedure. So when would we, as a committee, then receive this information and have the discussion about the water and sewer rates?
We'll be talking about the Water and Sewer Fund. I've forgotten the date. It's sort of mid in the process.
I don't recall the date either.
Yeah.
April 10th.
April 10th.
April 10th.
And
okay.
so we can bring back the information. It's a fairly complex issue and it has to do with the rate study. And so the Public Works Director can bring back that information to let you know what the system is now, what the issue is, and then how it maybe can be addressed. Part of it will be, it will be addressed when the water, sewer, and stormwater rate issue gets fully implemented. But that decision was delayed, the implementation was delayed, which causes this situation to go on longer. So we'll bring back that information and let you know what the potential options are.
And so there would be time during that meeting to actually have a discussion about that.
We could have a discussion about it, but the actual analysis, solution, rates would take a considerable amount of time to sort through, and I'll ask Mr. Fernandez to come and address that.
And just to be clear, Peter Fernandez, Public Works Director, good evening. The issue that Mr. Duana speaks about, and I'll let you know that we have had many meetings with Ms. Duana about this issue. We agree that there's a problem. It is an issue that is embedded in our rate structure. So it's not even our rates, it's our rate structure that was actually adopted many, many years ago by the City Council. We are going to be looking at our rate structure in the next 2 years. Council just acted on our water sewer rates this past year, so we will not be coming back to the council or the budget committee for any kind of action on the rates until January of the fall of 2012 for implementation in January of 2013. But it is on our work program to address this issue, and it is something that we will begin working on this year, and will engage the Water and Wastewater Task Force on to see if we can address this issue. What City Manager Norris was talking about is the stormwater utility fee will ultimately address the issue, but I think there's some things that we can do before that to address the issue. It is a complicated issue because it's really water sewer rates are a zero-sum game, so if we remove the one part that negatively affects small multifamily units, some other customer is going to pay it. So it's really just a cost allocation issue, not a cost. So it is burdened onto smaller multifamily units, and it does affect the kinds of units that Ms. Duana owns. So we certainly don't minimize her issue. We recognize it. There may be another way to look at it, but it's a complicated issue, and an issue that requires a review of the rate structure. So what I can do either for when we do our presentation, which is the second meeting in April, or at another time, is tell you briefly what it is, but we can really bog down this committee with going over that, what our cost allocation is, which is really what the issue is.
Which is not really a question before the Budget Committee.
That's correct.
Ms. Duana is raising the question here, but the solution and the analysis is something that would normally go through the Water Wastewater Task Force and then to City Council. It is quite detailed. It's not a budget question.
Chuck, and then Chuck.
Just one thing that would be helpful is you describe it as very complicated, and after watching all that, it does get but would be some, maybe just because I think you'll get asked about it, would be just a picture, maybe just for the counselors that are sitting here, but how does this get unwound? I mean, you describe it as a very complicated and pretty well set policy, but there must be some way to unwind it.
Right.
What does that look like?
And we're going to do that. We're going to start a review of our cost of service analysis. In fact, we're engaging our financial consultant now to take a look at that. We will be engaging some subcommittee of our Water Wastewater Task Force to look at our goals related to that, because there are a number of policy decisions, and this is a policy decision that was made. And Member Summers was on our Water Wastewater Task Force for many years and can speak perhaps even more intelligently than I can on the topic. But there are things that are embedded in the. So I mean, I don't want to create a lot of fluff. It is what we can do is we can bring back for the Budget Committee just a description of what the cost of service analysis is, and then more specifically what Mr. Duana speaks about, so that you can see where it is. But there's analysis that has to be done, because then it has to be that issue, and it's an issue related to inflow and infiltration related to stormwater that we bill in our wastewater rates, and how that's allocated. So once we deallocate from multifamily, we have to reallocate it to other users. So because the costs are the costs.
Member Motley?
I don't want to, I don't want to recuse myself here, but I'm also a multifamily property owner and I'm affected by this. And I do have what I consider a reasonable grasp of what Ms. Dewana is trying to address. I see the problem. Graphically, if you have a picture of it, it just becomes instantly clear. In terms of, Ms. Dewana made a comment that she saw this as an impact because of negative revenue. Indeed, it's not. It's source equity. It's who's going to pay the bill if the bill remains constant. Okay, but I guess I am a little concerned that we're talking about an issue here that has to do with water and sewer fund revenue and expenditure. And I, for one, irrespective of my private ownership, I hate to see that taken off the table of the Budget Committee because of its theoretical complexity. Frankly, I don't think it's complex. I think it's a real simple issue. The fact that she apparently has been before City Council multiple times, talked with administration multiple times, over apparently a multiplicity of years, and the lady's still standing here saying, this is not fair, this is inequitable. Seems to me, albeit, this is a great time to get involved in this, to find out, is the water and sewer fund being operated equitably to the citizens of the city? Yes or no? And if not, then we can make a recommendation to the council that they fix it. Again, I'm sorry, I don't see the complexity here. I don't see the difficulty, and I'm disappointed as a citizen that this has taken what I perceive to be multiple years, a long-standing issue over multiple councils, apparently. Thank you.
Okay. Did you, Clausen, did you?
I do. I don't want to downplay the issue. I think it makes a lot of sense, and I appreciate the fact that Chuck is pursuing it. But I'm wondering, and maybe the city manager can help me here, I don't know that this body has any say on that.
No, this issue is not within the scope of the Budget Committee's purview. It's really a City Council purview, and Council has established a water wastewater task force to really go through this analysis and work with the staff and the consultants. That is the way that we would pursue it.
So what I would like to say would be, I think it makes sense, and I agree with what Dan just said, and I would like to see this pursued, but I would wonder if maybe Chuck and I can team up on this, and maybe we can bring this and get it to the wastewater task force, sewer wastewater task force. We're going to have a lot to talk about here, and this is something, a rabbit hole that we could go down and be down for days.
Right.
So I'd prefer to see if maybe we could, maybe a commitment by Chuck and myself to get this to wastewater task force, if we could take it off our table here. Because I don't know that we can do anything about it here anyway.
And certainly, members of the public are welcome to come to those meetings.
Okay. Right?
However, I think I just heard him say outside financial consultant. I'm wondering why the city doesn't have the staff or the financial expertise that Public Works has to go out and hire an outside financial consultant.
Well, we operate a $100 million a year operation with, $250 million in debt instruments to boot, so sometimes we need a little help, and what we have is an individual that has helped us for a number of years in a very specialized piece of our operation, which is the cost of service analysis. And that's what we hire her to assist us on.
And we do that, Member McKelvey, in a number of areas. So anytime we need a specific expertise, but it's a short-term need, it's more cost-effective to hire somebody for that short-term time period than to have somebody on staff 40 hours a week year-round for that expertise.
Member Summers?
There is a process for this, and it goes from the Public Works Department through the Wastewater and Water Task Force and a recommendation to the City Council. And this isn't the first time this has come up. It's come up over the years. And COSA is something that the Water and Wastewater Task Force has studied for years, and it is complex. They do not have the resources within the city to manage equitable distribution of cost of wastewater to 60,000 some businesses and residents. So I would suggest that this go back to the Water and Wastewater and Public Works, go through City Council per design, and then we will pass on the budget that is presented by the city manager.
Well, this is already in our work. We will address this issue, and that's specifically, we are going to look at our cost of service analysis and our cost allocation. And this issue that Ms. Duana's brought up is an issue that we will be addressing. We recognize what it is. We've talked to her a number of times. We agree that it is an issue that needs to be addressed. But I also want to make it clear that the allocation as we have it today was vetted by the task force, was vetted by the city council over many meetings, and has been in place for a number of years. It needs updating. Once again, I don't want to minimize the issue and the concern. We recognize it, but this is not something that that was brought forth in secrecy or under the table or any such thing. This was all vetted. Mr. Summers, for one, was on the committee that helped us look at it, and he can tell you that, you know, the difficulty that we have to go through and the decisions that have to be made. So we will start over. We plan on doing so, but in the meantime, we'll bring back information, and I'm happy to bring it back to the budget committee so that at least you have an understanding of what it is that is embedded in there and what the issue is specifically to this. But we're on it. It's just will take a little while to get to it.
Thank you, Mr. Fernandez. I think that would be helpful if that information could come to the entire committee. It also sounds a little bit to me like perhaps part of the frustration is that there has been no deadline or target date by which this is going to be dealt with. And so there's perhaps a need to set a date or a target for when this could be dealt with, and there would be some assurance to the public that it will be.
There is a target, Mayor. It is fall 2012 when we will be back with our next rate proposal.
Boy.
So we will start working on this. Like I said, these are complicated matters. These are matters that we rely on the Water Wastewater Task Force to go over. This is not the only issue that we'll be addressing. There are a number of issues within the rate structure that need to be addressed. And we'll be looking at the whole thing, and that is our plan of action, so then we can come back and provide the City Council with a recommendation of our new rate proposal that we do on a biennial basis for then January 1st, 2013 and January 1st, 2014.
Okay. Member Motley?
I'm sorry, I'm hearing conflicting things. My understanding from what people have said here this evening is that this is not a rate issue, it's a rate structure issue. I understand that water rates were just, water sewer rates were just discussed this last fall, and new rates for a couple of years approved. But if it's not a rate issue, if it's a structure issue, why does it need to wait another almost 3 years to have an impact? Just because, and let me say, if this was enshrined 20 years ago, then this structure, this problem has existed for 20 years.
And again, we're starting work now. This is very complex. You can't take one component of the rate structure out and solve that separately without really understanding what the full impact is. So we're in a process. We're in the normal process. We'll be using some consultants. Public Works staff will work on it. It'll go through a number of deliberations with the Water Wastewater Task Force that has citizen members and elected officials on it, and then we'll come back to City Council in that normal timeframe.
Okay. Thank you. All right. Are there any other public testimony for future budget issues? How about other business? Any other business tonight to come before the meeting?
Can I ask, is where public testimony in our agenda, is that set by some city rule, standard, whatever? Could it be, in the future, could it be moved up so that we can handle public testimony with correspondence or adjunct to it?
I can respond to that. When we have our budget committee review the department recommended budgets, or the city manager recommended budgets, there is an opportunity after each departmental presentation or each fund, it depends on how we package it, for public testimony. So that is actually integrated periodically throughout the course of a meeting. This meeting is a little bit different because we have a single subject, and we've made it our policy to provide public input at every budget committee meeting, because that is the primary role of the budget committee, is to hear public input. So we do wrap it into multiple places as we get into reviewing department budgets.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Member Stroza?
That was basically what I was going to say, and as I recall, backing up a little bit, at our April 6th meeting, I believe one of the first things we would do is set the rules for the budget committee meeting. So that is something that we have the option to change if as a group we think it makes more sense. And the testimony at the end of the meeting would be for items not on the agenda or future items. Am I correct on that?
That's right. It's for future budget meetings.
But there would be an opportunity, assuming we all agree to that, there would be an opportunity earlier in the meeting for people to testify on items that are on the agenda.
Okay, any other business? Okay, hearing none, I'll hear a motion to adjourn.
Move to adjourn.
All in favor, say aye. Aye. Motion carried. We're out of here.